Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hour of Healing. Friends, I am your weekly host, Joe Debra. And our topic for discussion today is the part two of gaps in marriage. Again, our guest is Dr. Bright Adjei, who has his doctorate in physical therapy and also works as a real estate agent. Friends, if you haven't listened to part one of this discussion, I think it will benefit you greatly to take a listen to that. But we will pick up right where we left off. And so, Dr. Bright, again, thank you so much for joining the show once again.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be back here.
Wonderful. So, Dr. Adjei, we were having a discussion about what causes gaps in marriage and some of the things that contribute to it. We talked about the external factors and the internal factors. We talked a little bit about upbringing. We talked about the culture. We talked about education, whether the amount of education or the less of education being also a contributing factor to gaps in marriage. We also talked about the reason or the fact that most of these gaps exist because we don't take time to define why we getting married in the first place. And so we did mention that if you are not able to be successful as an individual or independently, it makes it even more harder. We're not saying it's not possible, but it makes it even more harder for you to be successful with somebody else with you because you bring in a whole human being with his experience or her experiences, his or her ideas and thoughts, ideologies, beliefs, hopes, expectations. And so obviously that goes without saying that financial stresses is also the source of a huge gap in most marriages. I'm not sure if I'm missing anything that we talked about, but you can certainly fill in those gaps for us.
Yes, I think in a nutshell you summarized most of that, and I'll add maturity. Maturity is not something we can define by
Yes.
age, but it's very, very important. If you're not mature, it makes marriage way, way harder. And so that's something individually we have to work on ourselves even prior to, because we live in a day and age of instant gratification. Where we want everything here and now. And so the patience is not there. The culture of patience and working hard and all of that's out the window. And so you have a lot of people who get married, even already thinking, oh, if it doesn't work, I'll just get out. That maturity is not
Yes.
there to know sometimes you have to stick through something, to make it better, to improve it. And if you go in again, like we said, with the idea of what do I have to offer? What am I going to give? Versus right out of the gates, oh, what am I going to get out of this? Then you're going to make it much, much harder with that approach.
Wow, wow. Thank you for that. So let's then just pick up from where we left off. So we've said a lot about these gaps and why the gaps need to be addressed. But what are really some impacts if we fail to address some of these gaps that we notice in our marriages? What are
Well,
some
first and
effects of
foremost, I
that?
think then, the marriage is just kind of there, just surviving. The joy that we're supposed to derive from it. There's a saying two are better than one, and there's a reason. If you get it right, it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to you. Because you're not going through life alone. You have a partner, you have a companion. Whatever one can do, two can do better, more. And so if you get it right,
Mm-hmm.
it's really rewarding in that sense. That's why it's worth every effort we put into it to try to do so. The other thing is if we don't, any fruit out of that marriage also bear those challenges. For instance, kids, because
Yes,
whether we
yes.
like it or not, people around us pick up on all of those. And, when our
Mm-hmm.
marriage is suffering, the first people to suffer are the kids. But not only are the kids,
Absolutely.
our friends, our family, our co-workers, you go to work already mad. Guess what? Everybody around you is going to suffer for that. So it's not something very trivial, even though we may not see it as that. The extent of the repercussions
Mm-hmm.
can really go far. Let's take you again, for example, not to put you on the spot, but if you're taking care of critically ill patients, but you're going to work not with the right frame of mind, that can be potentially,
Absolutely.
dangerous for those. But if the same you go
Mm-hmm.
into the work excited, peaceful, enjoy, you might even go above and beyond. And so
Yes.
it's very, very
Yes.
important. I bring a lot of things back to when they say charity begins at home. That's very, very important. So a lot of things, that home
Absolutely.
base is what sets you for anything that follows. And so to me, that
Mm-hmm.
is very, very
Mm-hmm.
important. And it's so crucial. That's why we have to at least work at trying to get it right. But we ourselves will suffer, our spouses will suffer, our kids will suffer. For that matter, our whole environment, whoever comes in contact with us is going to bear that responsibility. But if you flip it around, by the same token, if we do better, then all those people also benefit you know
Yes. Yes.
and so it's
Yes.
very, very important we try to improve that and try to get better at that, make it enticing for others so they will want to model those sort of marriages. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, our finances also
Oh,
suffer
everything,
drastically. And
everything. I mean, you just, like I said, you as an individual, emotionally, physically, financially, mentally, there's no let out, because this is something that becomes a
yeah,
daily struggle. It's not something you can park and
absolutely.
then continue. No,
Absolutely.
it becomes a daily. That's why, unfortunately, like I said in the first episode, sometimes so many people get to the point where mental illnesses, or even sometimes, unfortunately,
Correct.
to the extreme of killing people. Sometimes it's hard to understand why would
Yes.
somebody do that. But when there's a
Yeah.
problem, it
Yeah.
starts small and it keeps expounding, expounding, expounding. It leads into all these other things. So my thing
Absolutely.
is, if we really want to do and want to do it right, then we can't just ignore. And my approach has always been, whenever some problem starts, try to solve it when it's small, so it doesn't become big. It doesn't eat you up. You know, Sometimes that's
Absolutely.
not an easy thing. Some conversations are uncomfortable. Because somebody may not have ever even had that conversation before. And so now
Yeah.
you have to
Yeah.
understand the background. You have to understand nobody exists in a vacuum. So you have to look at things in a context. I
Mm-hmm.
used to tell my
Mm-hmm.
wife, I remember when we were dating, one time we are going to meet my family. And the first thing I said, we allowed. And there's a lot of us. And I said, are you sure you can handle this? And I knew at that time, you're not necessarily looking down the road and you think, oh, I'm just excited, I'm getting married. Like, yes, Mike, but you know what that really means. Because you're going to have to
Absolutely.
deal with these people going forward.
Yep. You're gonna have to
So
deal
the
with them. They
earlier
ain't going
you can
nowhere.
find ways and figure that out, the easier your life is going to be, because you're going to have family functions. The same people are going to be,
Yes. Yes.
and it's not every function that I have to be there. They're becoming your family. So as much as they're going to adapt to you, you also have to adapt to them. But once you thrive, then guess what? You have your own friends. I don't even have to be around. And sure enough, I mean, sometimes my sister will call me and she's spoken to my wife more than she's spoken to me. I'm like, really? And they're the ones telling me, hey, do you know your sister is doing this? I'm like, are you kidding me? How did you know? Well, I was talking to her. What? And so then, you know what? I go to bed and I thank God, because that's less
Yes.
problems for
Yes.
me. If they didn't get along, I will have to be always trying to figure this out. But thankfully, but it took work. I used to have to call every day, at least once a week. Have you called my sister? I call my sister. Have you called my wife? It took effort and work to make sure you value those people and don't just make it passive and just think, oh, they just know. I'm like, no, you don't know what they may be going through. But now, if both
Yeah.
of you are dear to
Yeah.
me, you have to also cultivate a relationship outside of me. That way, if I'm not
Yes.
there,
Yes.
you have that going. Same with my parents, same with your parents. We have to work at it. And it's a process. Because if you're looking at being in this marriage forever, then it's a journey. So with that journey, we have to start somewhere and then we'll see the fruit over time and it will get better.
It's actually sad when you're talking about this, because yeah, we because of our
Mm-hmm.
culture, this is something that we are kind of trained or
Mm-hmm.
raised to expect and to
Mm-hmm.
do. But recently, I was talking to a young friend of mine whose marriage is at the verge of breaking up, and this is really the bedrock of that
Mm-hmm.
issue, that the one of the partners just feel she doesn't he doesn't need the other person's
Mm-hmm.
family, and so it's like, okay, I'll stay to
Right.
myself, I don't
Right.
need anything to do with their family. And that has
Yep.
gradually
Yep.
firsted to a point where right
Yep.
now, honestly, as I
Right.
talk to you right now, I don't
Right.
know what the way forward is, but we're still praying for
Right.
more grace and more wisdom to be able to assist in any way we can. And I think for the uh, couple, I think the family also has to help in that sense, as you
Mm-hmm.
said that you tell your sister, have you
Mm-hmm. Oh
checked in
yes.
on this
Oh yes.
person? Sometimes it may get to a point where it might feel
Right.
painful that you are
Right.
outreaching and there is
Yeah,
no
man.
response
It's
coming
both.
in,
Yeah.
but to yeah, but to try to help the union that your family member and another
Right.
person has
Right.
formed, you sometimes have to keep
Right.
pushing through
Right.
that. So thank you for sharing that with
Yes.
us. I want to piggyback on something that you said about the
Mm-hmm.
children being
Mm-hmm.
impacted when these gaps are not addressed. Because, I mean, let's face it, we all know people that grew up in not ideal
Right.
environments. Some financially not ideal, some
Right.
spiritually not ideal, some emotionally or communication wise not
Right.
ideal. And so when such people, when you live with such
Mm-hmm.
people, you realize that even the things that were not
Mm-hmm.
communicated to them
Right.
verbally are the very things that
Repeat.
they are
Right.
doing or they are
Right.
showing. And so I think it has a very profound impact on especially the kids
Right.
that we raise or the gifts of kids that we've been given to
Right.
raise. But I also want to take it on the flip side and ask your opinion on this. That to me, I personally believe that if there are gaps and they are not
Mm-hmm.
addressed, that when children
Mm-hmm.
come in, they kind of um, make it even
Right.
wider. But what is
Right.
your
Oh yeah.
opinion or thoughts on
Because
that?
kids expose the gap. Oh yeah. They
Hmm.
put a
Hmm.
shining light on it. Because as adults, you can kind of manage it and do your thing. But when kids come in,
Absolutely.
some things you can't hide anymore. So, for instance, I think a lot
Yes.
of people, again, like we ask about what's the purpose of getting married? When it comes to children, what's the purpose of having kids? Is it just because we're married, so now we
Mm,
have to have kids? So, a lot of people don't even
mm,
have that conversation that they don't understand the responsibility of trying to raise
mm.
kids. There's a
Wow.
reason why a scripture says, train the child the way they should grow. What does it mean to train? So, a lot of couples don't even try to figure it out. Wow, this is a huge responsibility. That one I can't do by
Absolutely.
myself, so I need constant grace from God to try to be able to do that. But I think once you even understand the scope of what that responsibility is, it lets you know one, you can't do it by yourself, and two, you and your spouse
Yes.
really need to have that understanding of how we're going to try to approach this. Because
Correct.
otherwise, that's what makes the gaps bigger. Because I'm saying go
Yes.
left, he's saying go
Yes.
right. Now the kids are in the middle, we're confused. What do we do? And sometimes we think when they're young, it's not important. But what we don't realize is when they're young, they're still picking up even on the non-verbals. They might not be able to say it, but
Absolutely.
they experience. And kids
Absolutely.
are sharp. They're smart. I always tell people, don't underestimate kids. And there's research that even tells you, I think by age 3 or 4, kids are set kind of in their ways. So before they can even tell you what they know, they've already picked up from the parents how you go about things.
Correct.
So a lot of us, when they're 8, 9,
Correct.
10, we try to beat around the bush. We forget well we set them up already by 3 to 4. And so
Mm-hmm.
for me, again, it's one of those things where it doesn't mean you know everything, but at least you realize and acknowledge that hey, we're trying to hopefully God bless us with kids maybe in the next year. How are we going to raise them? What
Absolutely.
is our plan with the
Absolutely.
kids? We won't cover everything, we won't remember everything, but what are some of the things we're going
Nope.
to make sure we're in tune? And it may be okay, simple things such as, you know what, we will never disagree in front of the kids. Even if we have to disagree, we'll make sure they're not around, and then we can figure it out because
Mm-hmm.
we're humans, we're not going to agree on everything.
Absolutely.
But some of the little things, how are we going to raise them? Are we raising them ourselves? Somebody probably got
Mm.
married and thought, I'm going to marry the medical doctor. I'm going to be a stay at home mom. That was never communicated. I thought, oh, I got somebody who's very independent, who's going to work. So we're going to raise. Now we got a problem because it never occurred to them. Maybe the medical doctor thought, I want to raise my kids. So maybe now you're working. But all these things have to
Yeah.
have conversations and try to come up with some way, some structure generally. Things will happen where they have to be tweaked, they have to be changed. Absolutely. Maybe one set of parents live close by. Do you just assume, or they're just going to move in and help with the kids? But you haven't worked out the relationship
Exactly.
between the other spouse and the in-law. How's that going to happen? So a lot of these things, when you look at it in terms of Jenny, that is why it makes it easier for you to put the effort in. I tell you, that first 2 years when I was I'm trying to figure out the marriage out myself and my wife because we're just not living. But at the same time, even extra responsibility of trying to get on my parents, get on my siblings. Make sure you call in my wife. It's a birthday. Have you checked in? And then get on my wife. Make sure you're trying to create a family unit. Because if you don't, we're all going to suffer for it down the road. And especially when kids come.
Absolutely.
Because who's going to
Yes.
celebrate the birthday? Whose house are we going to? Well, I never want to see your parents.
Or who is even
Yes.
coming?
And so it's one of those things I think we really have to understand when it comes to parenting. It's a huge, especially in this part of the world we live. And one, we
Absolutely.
have to realize we can't do it on our own. We can't do it by ourselves. We need help from God. And God also works through people. And some of those people are the parents and the families, the uncles and aunties and friends. Friends are all community. And so we have to work at
Absolutely.
those relationships. That's why the first relationship between the two couple, and then you build all the other relationships out of that. When kids come, where they're going to school, going to private school, public school. Is it because you have maybe religious beliefs? You don't want them to be exposed to some of these things.
Hmm.
If you haven't figured it out and talk amongst even as a couple, then guess what? The kids are just going to expound that problem because you just assumed. Well, I just assume you understand. Well, I also just assume you understand. And then that sometimes actually is what leads
Absolutely.
to more of a divorce route because now they're shining
Correct.
bigger light and things that you can ignore, you can't ignore anymore. They're bringing it to the surface over and over and over, and it becomes a point of frustration.
Absolutely. Yeah, and just trying to keep us on
Right.
track so we can make this in time. But I think it's again I said this in part one, that these are
Mm-hmm.
practical. These are things that we
Mm-hmm.
hear of, we see, we face, we
Mm-hmm.
deal with on a daily basis. I don't remember the name of the pastor per se, but I listened to this African preacher who said the first sermon that a child,
Mm-hmm.
any child, should hear is not what a pastor gives in a
Mm-hmm.
pulpit, but the sermon of the relationship between mom and
Correct.
dad. And he went on to expand on it further, some of which we've alluded to. But the truth of the matter is, when you don't close these
Mm-hmm.
gaps, when you don't work on these gaps, yes, granted, you're not going to be able to close all of them. But when you don't work on them, when you are not actively engaged in working on them, then the cascade of
Yep.
effects becomes something that affects the community as
Yep.
a whole. But let's go right on. And now we know the gaps. Now we know what some of the consequences are, even leading to divorce if we don't close this gap, whether in the
Mm-hmm.
church, in the workplace, in the society, in our homes, and within the families. So, how do we go about closing these gaps, Dr. J?
Very good. Very good. Very good. First, we want to have to one acknowledge it as we've done. Two, we want to do better. We have to make that choice. One of the things I like, even in scripture, is in everything we've been given a choice.
Yes.
I have to decide: do I want this to be better? Do I want to be better? And what's my
Mm,
role in doing so? And that's the first part because these things don't happen by accident. It's a daily struggle, it's a daily challenge. Your marriage is not perfect. My marriage is not perfect. So when we say
absolutely
this, the
not.
only thing that I think I know that helps us that we know we want to do better every day. That's a choice as
Correct.
an individual the person has to make. And in doing so, then the other thing again, as believers, then we have to acknowledge we cannot do it on our own. That's also
Mm,
very, very important. It says the spirit and the flesh, always constant battle. Sometimes you know what to do, you still can't do it. There's a reason, you know. So you have to be in tune with the spirit, and basically what that means with the word of God, with God, you have to be in a relationship with God first. A lot of these things, without having the right relationship with God, is hard to do. That's why the Bible says,
absolutely.
how can you say you love God whom you don't see, but you don't love the person you see every day? You have to make it right
Absolutely.
with God because He's the one, He's the source of all of this. He's the one going to teach us all of this. He's the one going to lead us into all truth, direct us, love, all these things that we hope to espouse. We have to receive them first and understand it. That's why my favorite scripture, I think, in the last few years in Bible is Proverbs, where it talks about in everything get understanding. Even if it costs
Standing.
you,
Yes.
there's a reason for
Everything.
that.
Yes.
You know, wisdom and understanding. If you don't have the understanding and you just do things just because, then you crash. But when you
Yes.
tap
Yes.
into in any and everything, before you do anything, we used to have a song in our local dialect, the Presbyterians say, in any and everything you do, I go and ask God if it's pleasing to Him first,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
He is first the source. Once you make the choice, you have to go to Him. After all, the template we as believers are following is that He has given us. And so
Yes.
nobody else can teach you. You have to go to the source. And He's given us the source, His word. And it's such that it's available to any and everyone in whatever language. Spanish, English, whatever. And it's no wonder you need a prerequisite. That's the beautiful part about it.
Absolutely.
You don't need any, go through this person. No, 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 no. All these men of God, we sometimes even allude to. In the end, they also have marriages, and sometimes their marriages are nothing to even write home about. It's not about
Mm-hmm.
status.
Mm-hmm.
God is about accessibility and availability. If you
Yes.
get to Him, He will show you all these little things. He says those hidden and true things He let us find. So to me, that's the first and foremost. So when I see somebody, blah blah blah, and like I said, I have two very close people who are going through divorces now, and one of them because and a lot of them, I mean, honestly, is part of these gaps. But fundamentally, because
Yeah.
they even both sets are still Christians, that lets me understand they haven't understand what it means to let go and let God take control. They don't understand that
Mm.
part, and that's something you have to do individual before even the marriage comes in. That love and
Exactly.
forgiveness is only when the Spirit of God is in you. I just tell people we recite, forgive us our trespass, we forgive them. Like, yeah, you don't understand what you're saying. Because when somebody external wrongs you, it's not a big deal. I might not see them, blah, blah. And when there's somebody right next to you, that spouse, that child, that parent, that's when you're practicing forgiveness. And it's painful. But the only reason it is because when you don't let it go, when you don't give the will of God and let God take over, it becomes almost impossible. But the beauty of it is once you let God take control, it's a pruning process. You won't get it overnight, but you will slowly and
Absolutely.
methodically, you will learn through podcasts like these, through Bible classes, through messages, anointed message from men of God. You will learn little things, that will help educate you. Once you have the base, which is scripture and God, the rest become the practical part. You educate, you read books. That's one thing where a lot of us lack. You try to find and expose yourself to marriages that have been around 10, 15, 20, 40, 50 years that are thriving and learn from them. They went through the same challenges some of us. Sometimes they even went through worse challenges.
Absolutely.
Find out how they overcame it. And that will help us know. And then we become that for others. And so
Yes.
it really is. And I hope at the end of the day, that's the point of this podcast you do. It's not only identifying the problem, but it's also healing through that problem and getting on the other side.
Correct.
And then that's the
Correct.
key. When you identify the gaps, the whole point of this is not just, oh, this is a gap, this is a gap. It's okay, now what do you do with the gap? How do you
Absolutely.
bridge from one point to the other? Where now that gap is now a strength, it's now a blessing, it's now an asset, and we can do it.
Yeah.
We just have to decide to want
Absolutely.
to do that. It's hard work, but it's valuable. And at the end of the day, it becomes a blessing for all of us.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you mentioned that you have to
Oh,
choose to
yep.
do it. And the one of the podcasts that we've done, I'm not sure if we aired it yet, but I know we have the recording for sure. That is healing the
Mm-hmm.
foundation, and that goes directly to what you were describing, having that relationship with God, forming that basic
Mm-hmm.
foundation. I listen to that and then be able to heal from there. But one of the other things also that I also want to share as far as how we go about addressing this is not just even the idea that um, you have to realize that it's a problem per se, but when you know that this is a problem and you want to be able to work at it, then you open yourself to that vulnerability that allows people to
Right,
come in to be able to even
right,
help you. When you don't make that choice that you're talking about, then it becomes a real challenge because one, you don't probably accept that this is a
right,
gap. And if you think it's a gap, you don't think that it's going to
right.
cost you. And there's this couple that I'm chatting with them, and they telling me all these
Right.
problems that they have identified, and then the wife says, "But that is not going to affect our marriage." And I said,
Right.
"Why?" She said, "Well, it affects other
Uh,
people's marriage, not my
uh,
marriage." And I had to be very frank with her. I said, "But you know that consequences of
right.
actions don't vary
Right.
based on what you
Right.
believe.
Right. They're principles.
If Yes, if A is going to yield
Yeah.
B, no matter the
Yeah.
environment you put it
It's
in,
going.
that is the result that's going to
Right.
happen." And so, to our listener, these are some of the things that you need to start
Right.
working on. These are some of the things, um, being vulnerable, allowing yourself to be receptive to the things that come to you. Dr. Ajay did mention reading
Right.
books. If you don't like books, listen to
Right.
audiobooks. If you don't like listening,
Right.
find someone who likes to talk like
Right.
us.
Right.
We will talk all
Right. Right.
day. But I think that we kind of limit ourselves in a way, and the limiting of ourselves is what eventually leads us to problems. But I want to go in a little further and then ask you, because our unbelievers friends also do go through
Right.
troubles in their marriage as
Right.
well. And so, for the person who doesn't have a relationship with God, hasn't made a decision to build a relationship with God or heal that foundation, what other means is available to them? Do they seek
Right.
counseling? Do they seek professional help? So, how do they go about
So I will
these
piggyback a
things?
little bit right on the last point and continue with that. There are a lot of Christians, a lot of friends that I've had where I tell them, "Man, you're very proud," and they look at me like, "What do you mean?" Because we see pride as, "Oh, I've never boasted about things." I'm like, "Yeah, but if you're not humble to accept your faults, that's pride." That
Yes,
vulnerability, it comes to
yes,
being, not proud, and that's where a lot of us, we don't see ourselves as proud, but that's what we're exhibiting.
that's what we're doing.
I have so many of them. Yeah, I would say something. They're like, "Well, I've never insulted." Blah. I'm like, "Yeah, you don't see yourself a problem. That's what this is." That's why I also think it's very interesting. I always go back to one of the texts says, "If my people who are called by my name were," I always say it's interesting. The first thing he said was humble themselves.
Humble,
I always pay
yes.
attention in the scripture because it's inspired. The sequencing is very, very important. So a lot of things, like you said, the only reason, when you make that choice, part of the way you make that choice is accepting that vulnerability. Because if somebody is going to come in to help you, you have to bear it all, which means it makes you vulnerable,
Yes.
makes you naked, which means pride is out the window. But a lot of us,
Hmm.
that is the problem. Do you know who I am? I am Dr. So and so. No, I can't let somebody know I'm making a mistake with this. So then we keep beating our head against the bush, And so, no, I think a lot of
Unfortunately.
us have to learn, understand, and define some of these things where traditionally we may not see ourselves in some of these roles. But yes, pride is a huge. That's why even scripture says pride goes before a fall. And a lot of people
Yes,
think just because they're
yes.
not flat, no, my car. We think of pride in traditional sense, but we don't realize the lack of humility or openness to help, to assistance. And we all been there. I've been there. I remember I was always in a place where I wanted to help people, even as a student. And I got to a point where I was in trouble and people want
Absolutely.
to help me. Like, no, I got it. And you don't think of it as pride, but that's what it is. And
Yes,
so
yes.
that's very, very important. But, for others, that may not be necessarily believers. One thing that I think is still true, principles. They work whether you believe or not. It's a golden rule. Do unto others as you want others to do to you. That's why I
Mm,
went back to the first thing we do is what do I have to offer? If I'm asking for
right.
respect, am I offering respect? If I'm asking for love, am I offering love? If I'm asking for peace, am I providing that peace? A lot of
Yes.
things, I always say we can't worry about what the other person does. We can't control them, but we can control what we do. And the beauty of it is, even the hardest criminal, the most stubborn person, they notice change. They notice things that
Hmm.
they know, man, look at that guy. What happened to him? They might be confused and don't know the source where that's coming from. But true change, when it happens, is evident because it's our actions, it's our life. I'm one of those people, I always tell people, professional services, all those things, they're good. But again, they all start with making a choice and making yourself vulnerable because they're going to tell
Hmm.
you to go do something. So the point of it is whether you do or you don't, that's up to you.
It's up to you.
So the golden rule is a simplified version, but it's very true. Scripture will put another is love your neighbor as yourself. Who's your neighbor? Anybody else. We're all equals. One is no more important than the other. At the end of the day, it's the same blood that flows through all of us. You may be sitting on an escalator, I may be walking, but guess what? When we all bleed, we bleed the same. And so the whole idea is, I think, just treating people the way you want to be treated. And really think about it. I was talking to a sister this morning who was talking about all the blessings that had bestowed on her. And I said, that's awesome. God is great. But you know what comes with that you don't realize? The responsibility that you have to be that blessing to other people.
You have to be a blessing to somebody else.
He said, I'm like, yeah, that's the point. And so, when we're in marriages, the first thing every time I hear couples, he's this, I said, what about you?
Yes.
That's the first thing I would say, bring it home. I'm not saying you're not the fault. That's not the point of that. But the point of that is you can only control so much the other person does, but you can control your actions. And so, when somebody's hating you can still love them.
Yeah.
You don't have to hate them back. If somebody's insulted, you don't have to insult back. That is something you control. But when you decide to try to punish them and retaliate, then guess what? There's only one way that's going to end up. But you can only somebody to marry you. But you can show them your love. You can show them the respect. You can show them the sacrifice. All those things, you control that. You just do your part and let the rest be. And that is true whether you're a believer or you're not a believer. That's why even believers sometimes are worse with these. That's why we talk about that even, Christian marriages are collapsing. Because these are principles that doesn't matter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Dr. Adjei, we're going to be wrapping up soon. But before I ask for your final thoughts, I will actually ask you this question, and you can certainly lead into your final thoughts with this. So how do we help the person who is in a marriage and the partner is refusing to accept that these gaps are creating or can or will create problems for them? How do they also start
You say,
healing?
so help us God, right? Because that's the hardest part is when you're the third person, not in the marriage. Because sometimes what we don't realize is, whenever somebody shares something with us, that's sharing it from their perspective. That's one.
Correct.
And, we all see things a certain way depending on our perspective. And that's why I also think that relationship is very important, because I think when we have that relationship, even when somebody's sharing something with us, if we have that relationship with the other person, we can engage them. Because sometimes, because of what's happened in the marriage over and over and over, they tuned out. Or they present the same message in such a way that the other person is no longer receptive. One of the things I always challenge people, which I may be wrong, but I always like when somebody comes in and say, especially, this is classic, the woman will come and say, my husband never goes to church. They never go to church. I've said and tried everything, but he will never come to church with me. And, I always ask them a piercing question in return. I said, what's your attitude at home? You may be coming to church every day.
Well, I don't think that's wrong.
You may be coming to church
I don't
every
think that's
day,
wrong
but
at all.
if he is not seeing the benefit of you going to church,
there's no motivation for him to go.
And a lot of them take offense to that because they think, well, I'm doing everything. I'm like, maybe you think you are. But
I will interject quickly because I've had a similar situation. An elderly couple, actually, a few years, quite a reasonable amount of years older than me. And then I asked them the same thing, and I asked the lady. I said, "How about you bring church home with you? Because if you live out the life that you want him to go to church to live with him, or for him to see in the house, he will start living that life or going to church with you if that's what it is." So I'm sorry, but I just wanted to interject with
because
that.
we talk about a lot of these things. The reason why I give practical situations is because those are what we live with every day. Christianity is not some spiritual vacuum. It's something that has to show and be evident. So if you tell your husband, I'm going to women's fellowship meeting, true, you're going for an hour, but you didn't care enough to find out whether there was food at home, whether he needed anything, and that's your thing you do, you have to go to church, guess what? He will never be interested. And so when it comes to some of these things, that's one of the first things I say. It's not necessarily you complaining or sharing, but the point is, first and foremost, he or she is married to you. And so you have to be able to engage them and understand and find out why or why not. You may not agree with it,
Correct.
but any person wants to be heard. They want to be valued.
Yes.
And if they don't feel valued by you, they could care less who you bring in, whether it's the bishop. Right? No. That's the first and foremost. And two, that's why you also build a community of friends. And that's why you also build a community of people that both of you are also in that kind of relationship with. Because I strongly believe most things, 9 out of 10, you always have to try to solve between the two of you. Because at the end of the day, it's the two of you
Yes.
that it affects. And the two of you are the one
Correct.
living it. I strongly believe that. But if for whatever reason it goes beyond the two of you, if you bring in any person in, if that person doesn't have a relationship with that other spouse, forget it. That's
It's
why
not gonna work.
relationships are so important. You know, before you can communicate with them, you have to have a relationship with them. Before they'll be receptive or even have time. But if you go bring your pastor who he
Absolutely.
is, no idea who they are, it's not working. You know, if you go bring, but
Yeah.
if it's somebody, it could be their colleague, their coworker. We all have people, for lack of a better word, I think in our language, you can say ferubi. I don't even know how to
Mm-hmm.
frame that in English.
No, someone that we
Right,
revere
exactly.
and I respect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you have to find that connection, you know, and then maybe once you present to them, but you also have to be ready for feedback. You know, in our culture, they used to have this proverb where they say, "Udi kind of court and just wait them." When you're the first one to file a claim, it doesn't
Yes.
mean you won the suit.
You,
I had one couple where the young lady came. They're both very good friends. In fact, I knew the lady before the husband, and the husband has become very very close. But they were having issues, so the girl came to me, and she laid out everything. And after she was done, I realized I didn't even need to talk to him yet because there's so many things that she's saying that herself she has to work on. And I think she was very upset with me because her point was she was just telling me so I could go berate him. And I'm
mm,
thinking,
mm.
I don't even have to go berate him based on this. If you want me to be
What you telling
honest,
me?
or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? And so sometimes when we even share these things, we also have to be ready for that feedback and say, I
Yes.
want you honestly, in as much as the person may be helping you with prayer, but when it's time for advice, we should be honest enough that don't tell me what I want to hear.
Yep.
Tell me
Yep.
what you genuinely think, and we'll be ready to implement that. And so may God help us. I mean, it's a constant struggle, a daily struggle. But with God's help, we can and we will be able to thrive in our marriages. God bless you.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Adjei. This is fascinating stuff, and I believe we can just keep going and going. But, dear listener, we will be ending here. But basically, to summarize what we've discussed with you, I live my life on the principle that nobody marries their
Mm-hmm.
enemy. There was a reason why you were attracted to this person in the first place. And yes, things sometimes don't work out. But making that conscious decision that you are going to work on the various things and the various gaps that exist in your marriage, I believe is the starting point. Everything else will gravitate to that and will be able to help. So, like we talked about, gaps in marriage refers to any area of your marriage right now, as you're listening to us, where there is dissatisfaction or disconnect between you and your spouse. And that can even involve things outside of you that is influencing the relationship that you and your spouse have. It could be intimacy, it could be communication, it could be trust, it could be financial issues, interest, support. You can name it. Anything in your life where there is a disconnect or a dissatisfaction right now. Friends, we urge you to actively sit down, consider it, make that conscious decision to work at it. Because at the end of the day, if you do not work on this, it's going to bring about feelings of unhappiness, unfulfillment in the relationship, and that is what ends up affecting the family, the children, and everybody else that God will bring your way. There are people who I personally believe are positioned in our life to help us reach our destiny, our goals, that we are chasing away because we are not addressing the gaps that exist in our marriage. And so when they come, they are unable to stay just because of that. So, friends, work on it. And with God being our helper, as Dr. Adjei said, we will surely be able to overcome. Thank you so much for joining us again today for another thought-provoking conversation. Again, this was part 2 of Gaps in Marriage. God bless you for listening, and we will see you same time next week. Bye-bye.